Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I didn't expect my engagement to crack open over a bowl of leftover soup, but that's exactly how it happened. I walked into our apartment late on a Tuesday evening, tired from a long day surveying a job site, and found my fiancée, Lauren, sitting at the kitchen counter with this sharp, bored expression on her face. She barely glanced up before saying the line that rearranged my entire life. She told me I should try dating her sister because you're both so boring together. She said it lightly, the way someone tests a match before tossing it. For a moment, I just stood there, waiting for the punchline. None came. I felt that familiar tightness in my chest. Not anger, just the cold clarity that something had shifted long before I arrived home. I kept my voice steady when I told her it was an interesting idea. She laughed, assuming I wasn't capable of recognizing an insult even when she wrapped it in a joke. I stepped outside before she could say anything else. The air was cool, the street quiet, and I leaned against my Ford Escape trying to understand how we'd reached this point without me noticing the slope. That's when I called her sister, Emily. I didn't sugarcoat anything. I repeated Lauren's words exactly as they were spoken. Emily didn't laugh. She didn't gasp. She just went silent in a way that suggested she'd been waiting for something like this to surface. She asked me to meet her the next morning. She didn't sound dramatic or emotional, more like someone who had information she wasn't sure how to carry anymore. I agreed. When I went back inside, Lauren was already on a Verizon call, pacing the hallway, her voice soft and polished, the version of her she used only around people she needed. She didn't even notice me walk past. I sat at our IKEA dining table, opened my notebook, and wrote one sentence. Something's been wrong for longer than I realized. That night, Emily texted me a short message. We need to talk in person. It's important. I didn't know what she planned to show me. I only knew one thing with absolute certainty. Lauren's careless little joke wasn't a joke at all. It was the first crack, and the ground beneath us was already shifting. I met Emily the next morning in the parking lot outside a Home Depot, the kind of neutral place where nobody pays attention to anyone else. She stepped out of her car with this steady, almost cautious look, like she'd been carrying a truth too heavy to keep to herself any longer. She didn't waste time. She handed me a small envelope and said her sister had been acting off for months, then added that she didn't want to talk about it in public. I could hear the strain in her voice, the kind that comes from watching someone you love drift into a version of themselves you barely recognize. Inside the envelope were printouts, nothing dramatic, nothing intimate. Just meeting schedules, travel dates, and internal memos from her firm. The senior partner's name showed up everywhere. Lauren had mentioned him before, always in that polished tone she used when she talked about people above her. But seeing those timestamps, the late-night entries, the weekend work sessions, it hit me in a different way. Not anger. More like a clean, cold line being drawn. Emily explained quietly that she'd noticed her sister becoming someone she didn't trust, someone who used relationships the way other people use stepping stones. She admitted she didn't want me blindsided. That was her whole motivation. Not revenge, just fairness. And for a moment, I felt a small crack in my own silence, a mix of gratitude and something heavier. I didn't let it spill over. When I got back home, Lauren was already dressed for work, moving around the apartment like she was late for an audition. She talked about a new assignment and a private strategy review, delivering each phrase with the sharp, bright confidence she used when she believed she was leveling up. She didn't notice I was watching her differently now. She only asked why I was up so early. I told her I had a site meeting. I didn't explain anything else. After she left, I sat at the IKEA table and opened my notebook again. My hand hesitated for half a second before I wrote the next line. Patterns don't lie. That hesitation wasn't weakness. It was the moment I finally acknowledged reality, not the version she performed, but the one she didn't think I could see. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. The next few days felt like walking through a house where the doors had been quietly rearranged. Nothing looked different, but nothing lined up the way it used to. Lauren moved through her routines with this bright, manufactured confidence, fast steps, clipped sentences, the kind of energy people have when they're trying to outrun something. She didn't notice the shift in me. She only noticed herself. On Wednesday morning, she rushed past me, juggling a folder and a half-finished Panera Bread coffee. She said she had a partner prep meeting, emphasizing the word partner the way someone would tap a glass to make sure it rings. I felt a flicker of something, maybe discomfort, maybe just the sting of clarity, but I let it pass. I wasn't ready for confrontation. I was ready for confirmation. At the job site, between measurements and equipment checks, I studied the documents Emily had given me. Every timestamp connected to another. Every late night matched perfectly with the senior partner's schedule. Nothing romantic, nothing scandalous, just proximity that didn't require imagination to interpret. I felt a slow tightening in my stomach. Not rage, but the kind of disappointment that changes temperature as it settles. That evening, Emily called again. Her voice had more weight this time. She'd seen new internal updates, meeting reservations logged outside normal work hours, travel approvals, another strategy session blocked out exclusively for Lauren and the senior partner. She didn't embellish. She didn't dramatize. She just said she didn't want me to think I was losing my mind. That mattered more than she realized. I met her the next morning in the same Home Depot lot. She handed me a second envelope, slightly thicker than the first. Her expression carried a quiet apology, like she wished the truth hurt less. I thanked her, and she gave me a searching look, as if she expected cracks in my calm. I felt the emotions, confusion, disappointment, even a small pulse of betrayal, but I held myself steady. When I got home, Lauren was on a Verizon call, pacing the hallway with a polished tone she reserved for higher-ups. She didn't see the envelope in my hand. She didn't see the change in my eyes. I walked to the IKEA table, opened my notebook, and wrote one more line. Now it's not suspicion. It's fact. And once something becomes fact, the next step writes itself. By the end of that week, Lauren's behavior had shifted into something almost theatrical. She floated through the apartment like a person already rehearsing for a life she planned to enter alone. Every sentence she delivered sounded like it had been practiced on her commute. She mentioned leadership windows, strategic visibility, and direct partner exposure, all with this subtle glow in her eyes, like the future she wanted was finally within reach. And that future didn't include me. One evening, she came home later than usual, stepping inside with that polished smile she used when she needed to control a room. She said her team had been selected for a rare mentorship cycle with the senior partner. She kept her tone level, but every detail she offered matched the schedules in Emily's second envelope. I felt a dull thud inside my chest. Not sharp, not devastating, but definitive. Like hearing the last click of a lock you didn't know was closing. I didn't ask questions. I didn't need to. Instead, I told her I hoped her hard work paid off. She softened instantly, mistaking my calm for admiration instead of recognition. People reveal themselves most when they think they're winning. The next morning, at the work site, I took my lunch in the car and opened the notebook again. I wrote a single line under the others. She's already gone. I'm just catching up. It hurt to admit that, even silently. There was a weight to it, a small ache under the ribs, the kind that doesn't ask for attention but refuses to leave. I let myself feel it for a moment. Nothing loud, nothing dramatic. Just the quiet grief of understanding you were replaced long before the truth surfaced. That afternoon, Emily sent one more update. Internal chatter around the firm said Lauren was being considered for a fast-track advancement, something nearly impossible without a senior partner's backing. Emily said she didn't want to interfere, but she also didn't want me thinking I'd imagined the pattern. Her voice held a kind of reluctant protectiveness, the kind people have when they're tired of watching good intentions get crushed. When I got home, Lauren was already gone again, her half-finished Panera Bread cup sitting on the counter. The apartment felt unfamiliar, not empty, just honest. And honesty, once seen, makes denial impossible. Lauren's off-site trip was the moment everything finally locked into place. She told me about it on a Thursday night, tossing the information out casually while packing a small suitcase. She said the senior partner had invited her to a strategy retreat, the kind reserved for people he saw a future in. She didn't look nervous or conflicted. She looked excited, almost weightless, as if she'd already stepped out of our life and was just grabbing her coat on the way out. I asked her when she'd be back. She said Sunday night and added that she'd probably be unreachable because the retreat location had terrible reception. She didn't realize that line landed harder than anything she'd said in weeks. Not because it was suspicious, but because she didn't think I deserved anything more detailed than that. When she left the next morning, I watched her drag the suitcase down the hall without glancing back. I felt a small twist in my chest, not heartbreak, more like the quiet sting of knowing this version of us had ended long before the words were spoken. I let myself feel it for a breath. Then I moved. At lunch, sitting in my car outside a Home Depot, Emily called. She didn't ask how I was doing. She already knew. Instead, she told me she'd heard from a coworker that the trip wasn't official. No team, no retreat, just two names on the travel log, the senior partner and Lauren. She hesitated before adding that she hated being the messenger, but she'd rather the truth come from her than from some rumor weeks later. I appreciated that more than she knew. That evening, the apartment was unnervingly still. I walked through it slowly, taking in the shape of a life that had already tilted. On the counter, her planner sat open next to an empty Panera Bread cup. The last entry she'd written before leaving was circled twice. Opportunity. I stood there longer than I expected, feeling the weight of that word. Not because she chose ambition. I respected ambition, but because she'd chosen silence, secrets, and strategy over honesty. It wasn't the betrayal that hit me. It was the calculation. And that was when the next step became obvious. I opened my notebook and wrote a new line under all the others. Exit has to be clean. Not loud. Not dramatic. Clean. Lauren stayed gone for 3 nights. The silence she left behind didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a room that had already forgotten the person who used to live in it. On the second night, Emily called. Her voice had that tight, careful tone people use when the truth is heavier than they'd like it to be. She told me internal chatter at the firm had shifted. Some employees were openly speculating about Lauren's connection to the senior partner. No accusations, nothing dramatic, just that quiet office awareness that spreads when two people spend too much time in private strategy sessions. I didn't say much. I just listened, letting the picture fill itself in. After the call, I drove out to the edge of town, parked near an empty IKEA lot, and sat there watching the streetlights flicker on. I let myself feel the weight of everything for the first time. Not the betrayal, but the pattern of it. The long months of distance. The practiced excuses. The way she'd spoken to me like someone who had already upgraded her life and was waiting for the paperwork to catch up. There was a sting in admitting that. A real one. But naming the truth didn't weaken me. It centered me. The next morning, I gathered every document Emily had given me, dates, emails, calendar logs, and arranged them into a clean timeline. No speculation. No emotion. Just a sequence even Lauren couldn't talk her way out of. After that, I drove to a small legal office downtown and requested the forms to dissolve the engagement. The clerk asked if I wanted to schedule a mediation. I told her no. This wasn't a fight. It was a correction. When the papers were finalized, she slid them across the desk in a slim envelope. It felt strangely light, considering how much had shifted to create it. I left the office and stopped at Applebee's for a quiet lunch. Sitting alone in that booth, I felt the first real moment of calm I'd had in weeks. Not satisfaction, just clarity. A feeling that the ground under my feet had finally stopped moving. On the last page of my notebook, I wrote 4 words: return everything in silence. Lauren returned late Sunday night, rolling her suitcase through the door with the confidence of someone who believed the world still tilted in her favor. She greeted me with a tired smile that didn't reach her eyes, then launched into a polished recap of her strategy retreat, speaking in broad strokes: growth opportunities, expanded trust, high-level planning. Not one concrete detail. Not one mention of a team. Just vague brilliance she expected me to applaud. I watched her carefully, not with suspicion anymore, but with recognition. The version of her standing in front of me wasn't the woman I had proposed to. She wasn't even pretending to be. She was already living in the next chapter, and I had become an old paragraph she hadn't bothered to delete yet. When she finally went to shower, I went to the hallway closet and pulled down the small box where I'd kept the engagement ring. I placed it gently on the counter beside the sealed envelope containing the dissolution paperwork. Seeing them side by side hit me in a quiet, unexpected way. Not grief, just the final confirmation that the life we'd built had already been dismantled long before I arrived at this point. The next morning, she rushed out of the apartment again, juggling her bag and a half-finished Panera Bread cup. She said she might be home late because the senior partner had follow-up sessions planned. She didn't look at me long enough to notice anything different. The door clicked shut behind her. Once the apartment settled, I picked up the envelope and drove to her parents' house. They lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where mailboxes still leaned slightly from weather instead of time. Her mother answered the door with a warm, familiar expression, one that wavered when she saw the envelope in my hand. I told her it contained something important for Lauren and that I wanted it delivered directly to her. Nothing dramatic. No explanations. Just the truth packaged in silence. On my way back home, I called Emily. She didn't sound surprised when I told her the documents had been delivered. She only said she hoped I was taking care of myself. There was no judgment in her voice, just calm understanding. When I returned to the apartment, it felt lighter, not empty, just aligned. Like the first moment after a storm when the air resets itself. And for the first time, I realized the exit wasn't the end. It was the shift. Lauren didn't mention anything about the envelope when she got home that night. Either her parents hadn't called her yet, or she assumed it was something routine. She moved through the apartment with a distracted confidence, humming quietly as she reheated leftovers, completely unaware that the floor beneath her had already shifted. Watching her, I felt something I didn't expect, a faint, steady acceptance. Not relief, not triumph. Just the understanding that the part of my life involving her was already in its final paragraph. The next morning, she woke earlier than usual, dressed sharply, and said the senior partner had invited her to a closed-door planning session. She seemed proud of the phrase, like it validated every questionable decision she'd made along the way. I told her to have a productive day. She smiled, kissed the air near my cheek, and hurried out with her bag and her Panera Bread cup. The door clicked shut. It felt like a period at the end of a sentence. I waited until the apartment settled into its quiet rhythm, then grabbed the small box with the engagement ring and placed it inside my jacket. There was no hesitation, no second-guessing. It was simply the step that needed to be taken next. On my way to her parents' house for the second time, I called ahead. Her father answered, his voice steady, almost formal. He said they'd received the documents and would like to talk before I handed over the ring. When I arrived, they were waiting at the dining table. Her mother looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before. Her father looked resigned. I set the ring box on the table without ceremony. I explained that I chose a formal, quiet dissolution because arguing with Lauren would only give her room to twist the narrative. Her father nodded immediately, understanding more than I expected. Her mother said softly that the family had seen Lauren's ambition take sharp turns before, but they hadn't realized how far it had gone this time. Before I left, Emily stepped out from the hallway. She didn't speak until we were alone on the porch. She told me she didn't want me to feel isolated in all of this. There was something sincere in her eyes, steady, grounded. Not pity, recognition. Driving home, the car felt warmer than usual. Not because anything good had happened, but because the truth was finally out in the open. And once the truth breathes, it changes everything that comes next. Sunday brunch was Lauren's idea. She floated into the kitchen that morning acting like nothing in her world had shifted, telling me her family wanted to celebrate her recent progress at work. She said it lightly, almost glowing, as if she'd already been chosen for the next stage of her career. She didn't know her parents had read the documents. She didn't know I had already returned the ring. And she definitely didn't know Emily had stepped quietly to my side, not against her, but for the truth. On the drive to the restaurant, Lauren talked nonstop about the senior partner, his leadership, his vision, how he saw potential in her. Every word she said drew a clearer line between us. I wasn't angry. I was watching the final mask fall away in real time. The only emotion I felt was a faint, steady ache for the version of her I had once believed in. That ache faded with every mile. When we stepped into the restaurant, her confidence faltered for the first time. Her parents weren't smiling. Her father sat with his hands folded, her mother holding a napkin like she didn't trust herself to speak yet. Emily's eyes met mine for a moment, steady, grounded, not urging anything, just witnessing. Lauren didn't notice the tension. She launched into her rehearsed updates, talking about exclusive mentorship access and senior-level exposure, expecting applause. Instead, her father asked calmly if she had anything she wanted to tell me. She laughed it off, confused. Then he slid the dissolved engagement papers across the table. She froze. I'd seen her perform confidence 100 times, but nothing prepared her for the silence that followed. She looked at me like she was searching for a script she hadn't written. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse her. I simply told her that I chose the cleanest exit because anything louder would have become another tool for her to manipulate. She stared at the paperwork, then at me, stunned that the quiet man she underestimated had drawn the final line without a scene. Emily's parents didn't defend her. They didn't scold her. They just let the silence speak, and silence was louder than anything she could have said. Lauren finally stood up, shaking, stepping outside to make a call. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. She had spent months writing a future without me. I had simply turned the page before she realized it was over. Lauren didn't come back to the table. She stayed outside, pacing in circles, her phone pressed to her ear while she tried to reach someone who could help her rewrite the moment. But the truth was no longer bendable. Not for her. Not for any of us. Inside, the conversation didn't rush to fill the silence she left behind. Her parents stayed still, letting the weight of everything settle. Emily sat quietly, her hands folded, her expression calm in a way that told me she had expected this outcome long before today. I felt a strange mix of things, not satisfaction, not pain, just the deep exhale of knowing the hard part was over. No more guessing, no more second-guessing, just clarity, clean, sharp, and unarguable. Her father told me he respected the way I handled everything. Her mother added that she hoped I wouldn't carry bitterness from this. I told them the truth. I wasn't angry anymore. Disappointed, yes. But disappointment loses its sting once you accept someone for who they've chosen to become. When Lauren's parents stepped away to speak with each other, Emily and I remained at the table. She leaned forward slightly and said she was glad I hadn't let her sister drag me through months of half-truths and shifting stories. There wasn't romance in her voice, just honesty, steadiness, and something I hadn't felt in a long time. Genuine concern without agenda. We finished the brunch without Lauren. Her seat stayed empty, untouched, an honest reflection of how absent she'd been long before today. When we stood to leave, Emily walked beside me, not close, not assuming anything, just matching my pace the way people do when they understand the ground beneath you has changed. Outside, the sunlight hit the pavement in long stripes. Lauren was nowhere in sight. Her car was gone. No goodbye, no confrontation, just disappearance. The same tool she'd used on me for months without realizing it. Emily's father suggested we all regroup soon, once things settled. I nodded, thanking them for their fairness. As I walked toward my own car, Emily paused beside me. She said she wasn't interested in taking sides, just in making sure the truth didn't get lost. It was a simple line, but it grounded something in me. Because when we stepped into Lauren's family brunch that morning, the story had been about her. By the time we walked out, the story was finally my own again. Quiet, clean, closed. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.